Welcome to the Broken Graciously podcast, where we challenge the culture of brokenness by exchanging beauty for ashes holistically, with candid conversations, transparency, and practical tips. I'm your host, Tanisha B. Lester, lovingly known as Coach T. I'm a Master Certified Life and Business Coach, Certified Christian Coach, Certified Pastoral Counselor, and published author. I look forward to engaging with you in the comments as well as on IG. Follow me on IG at Tanisha B. Lester with the number 1. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. Welcome to another episode of Broken Graciously. This is episode 4, and today's topic is going to be arrested development. So, what is arrested development? Number 1, it's a psychological term. Number 2, it's the title of my book. So, let's go with number 1. Arrested development is a psychological term, and it basically says that at the point of any trauma that you have experienced, whatever that age is, that is the point in which your development is stunted. So yes, you grow age-wise, and seemingly you develop psychologically, but there's still that quote unquote child inside. So we've all heard people say about healing the child inside, or, you've heard women refer to men as man child, like all of those terms. That's what it basically goes back to. Number 2, as it being the title of my book, in 2019, actually 2018, I began writing a book. Last episode, we talked about identity and how I felt about my identity and how I come to begin discovering my identity. So the title of my book is Arrested Development, A Journey to Discovering Identity and Purpose. It's available on my website at tanishablester.com, and it's also available on Amazon. So, 2018, I started or felt this pull, this inclination, this urge or prompting, if you will, to write a book. So I thought, okay, I'll write a journal. Right? That's all I could think of at the time. So I started. But as I was doing so, I felt this deeper pull from God to go deeper, tell a little more, be more open, be more, just be more. In all honesty, I was probably trying to take the punk road out. I ain't gonna lie. I'll be totally honest about that. However, I was obedient in starting. That was key for me. Just being obedient and starting. Because at this point, I had started my healing journey of discovering who I was and what more life had to offer and all of that. So first, let me put this disclaimer out there. I'm sorry for not doing this at the top of the show, but here's my disclaimer. This episode may be a little triggering to some individuals who have experienced or currently are experiencing sexual trauma, sexual abuse, sexual assault, molestation, any of that. This may be a triggering episode, so please be aware and govern yourself accordingly. So back to what I was saying. At the beginning of all of this, I had to sit with myself and relive, not necessarily rehearse, but relive and revisit a lot of things that had happened throughout my life that brought me to this place of needing to be healed and seeking my true identity. When I thought about, I didn't even think about when God gave me the title to this book, because I had no idea this was a psychological term. I had no clue about any of it. I was praying or sitting or doing something, and the title came to me. And I was like, Arrested Development. Like, what is that? Now, there is a television show that's out there that bears that title. But when I looked it up, first that all that popped up, but then the psychological term popped up, and I was like, "Ooh, that's me." Um, and it was a lot. So what I realized was, at the point of my trauma being sexual abuse and molestation by several people at the hands of men and women, um, from the time I say around 5. I don't know the exact age. What I do know is I was not in kindergarten. Kindergarten for me started around 5 years old. So I say around the age of 5. It continued until I was 15. Again, family members, friends of family, a neighbor, and classmate, all of that. That was my traumatic experience. So what I realized was that my growth, my development was stunted, i.e., arrested at that time. So that would explain why, you know, not to say I wasn't smart, but cognitively on some, like emotionally, I'll go with emotionally. That explains it better. Emotionally, on some levels, I still function like a toddler, or like at an age that I wasn't chronologically. And while it sounds harsh, it just really made sense. And it gave creed to a lot of the things that I felt, and a lot of times where I just couldn't understand like why I behaved certain ways on certain instances. So when I say that, let me ask you, has there ever been a point where like you acted some way, reacted some way, and like afterwards you was like, dang, like why did I do that? Like, why did I go that far? Like, that should be right. You have those moments, if you're truly introspective, where you can look back and see, like, there was some childish behavior, reactions, or what have you. And you a whole adult out here doing all adult things, but your behaviors and your mannerisms speak to you of still being a child. Well, I submit to you that's why. So, in the book, I had to sit with that, right? Like, at first, I'm not gonna lie, I was like real terrified to write any of this. I didn't want to put my story out there. I didn't want to recount it. I didn't want to do any of that. The fact of the matter is, when I told, if that comes up in your mind, you start questioning, well, why didn't you tell? I did. I wasn't believed. So consequently, I shut down. I didn't tell anybody anything else about it. There also were points in which my mind just completely shut it all out. The brain is so intricate that it absolutely has the ability to shut things out in a manner of which to protect you psychologically. And that's what happened. Now, there were times, especially in my mid to late 20s, where it came up and then I shut it all out again. Then there was another time prior to turning 40 that it all came up again. And I went to counseling that time. Um, so I was able to work through some of it. And that's when I figured out a lot more things than I had figured out previously. And I started to remember more. So along this healing journey, like I had to, like, more things came up. Like, I think everything at this point came up. At this point, in 2018, I was well in my 40s. 45, 46, like everything came up. So I had to sit with it, excavate it, dig it out, see how I felt about it, write it out. It was hard writing all of that out. In fact, I didn't tell anyone about this book. I didn't tell my mother, I didn't tell my father, I didn't tell anyone until the book was published. Because number one, I didn't want anyone's opinion tainting my assignment. And I didn't want their feelings to cause me to shrink from my assignment. Because I knew that, everybody was going to be worried about how they were perceived. Bare bones, and I'm not saying this to be harsh, I didn't care how they felt. It wasn't about them. Your story, my story, is about us. Your story is about you, my story is about me. Their stories are about them. It didn't matter how they felt they would be perceived or any of that. None of that mattered to me. I just knew I had this assignment. It was heavy. I didn't know why I needed to write this book. It didn't make any sense, but I needed to do it, and I was going to follow through and do what God told me to do in writing this book. So if that's you, and you have a story, and you felt this inclination to write your story, whether you know, understand, or perceive that came specifically from God, here is your confirmation. Write the book. Write your story. Because though you may feel like it's heavy, it's hard, and it doesn't make sense to you, there will be people that need to hear what you have to say. The same way that I had to come to realize that people needed this book. People needed to hear what I had to say, whether they're in my family, whether they're people I don't know, whether they're just clients that I've come in contact with. They needed to hear this because they can see themselves in this story. And they can see, most importantly, that though you have gone through that, or maybe currently going through that, the possibility of coming out and thriving are great. You may feel just like I did. I felt alone. I felt solitary. I felt isolated. I felt dirty. I felt weak. I felt all of the things. Because it felt like it was just me and nobody understood. Let me tell you, I understand. Let me tell you that you're not alone. Let me tell you that I feel your pain. I understand where you're going through. I understand what you've gone through. You are, number one, a survivor. And don't ever allow anyone to negate your experience. Number two, let me tell you that you do not have to live in survival mode any longer. I thought survival mode was a constant state that I would always have to be in, which leads again back to me not knowing my identity because it was just a matter of survival. I didn't know anything else to do. I just had to get through life the best way that I could. I didn't see the possibility of being happy. I didn't see the possibility of having healthy relationships. I didn't see the possibility of being comfortable with me. I didn't see any of those possibilities. But again, let me confirm to you that it's possible. And it's all within your reach. It's all within your realm. It's all within the possibilities and the design of who God made you to be and what He has for you. That nothing that has occurred, number one, it wasn't your fault. Number two, it does not mean that you can't have a purposeful, happy, productive life in which you survive, but you thrive in that place. None of that matters. I often question God and prayed and asked, like, why me? Why did any of this happen to me? Why couldn't I have been born into a different family? Why did no one believe me? Like all the whys. Any why you can think of, I asked. Emphatically, here's what I heard. God emphatically said to me, it wasn't for you. Now that seems harsh. And it seems contradictory. So you mean to tell me I was molested and I went through all of these things, but it wasn't for me? Well, that doesn't seem, it doesn't seem right. And it just makes no sense. So God, what are you talking about? So what He began to show me was that, yes, it happened to me, but it didn't necessarily happen for me. It happened for me to survive. It happened for me to progress and to be able to come to a place where I could see myself the way He sees me and begin to show others that they can see themselves the way that He sees them, and that you have the absolute ability to move forward. It didn't make sense then, but over the last few years, it has come to make absolute and total sense. Yes, it happened to me. And even in the midst of it, I often wondered where He was. But what I came to find out was He was there all the time. He knew it all. It was all designed. And you may say, why does God let bad things happen to good people? Sometimes it's those particular things, put into the right context, that can be the biggest blessing of your life. I never thought that I would look at myself as being a survivor of sexual assault as being the biggest blessing of my life. And we're in April. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I never thought I would say that. And somebody would probably look at me like I'm a total fool for saying that. But having gone through that has set me up right dead smack in the middle of my purpose. I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what I was called to do. So if someone, like I said last episode, if someone were to ask me who I was back then, it made me uncomfortable. It doesn't make me uncomfortable anymore because I can sit in your face and tell you, number one, I'm a child of God. Number two, I am a sexual abuse survivor, and I make no qualms about it. I'm not afraid to tell it, and I don't care who knows it. Number three, I can tell you that I was made on purpose, with purpose, and for purpose. I was created to tell my story. Though I don't like hearing the sound of my voice, I no longer care because my voice is specifically tuned to a people that need to hear me. I can sit and tell you that I am beloved, that I am a treasure, that I am beautiful, that I am intelligent. I can sit and tell you all of that. Because going through this process and learning that my development was arrested, I have become aware, number one, but two, I have moved into a place where my identity is discovered, and having learned my identity, that shifted me into my purpose of speaking out to other women, to groups of people that I come in contact with, to speaking on conferences, to this podcast, to writing this book and other books. All of that is my purpose, because God created me to give voice to survivors of trauma. Now, let me say this, and I'm not going to go too deep in it. Trauma does not mean that everyone I come in contact with are sexual abuse survivors. No, 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 no. Trauma, it's a spectrum of trauma. So your trauma can be as quote unquote, small as a car accident to as big as, watching a murder, going through sexual abuse. Like there's a spectrum of trauma. And my trauma may not be your trauma, but that does not mean that you have not experienced trauma on some level. But I know that that's the purpose that God called me for. He purposed me to be able to give voice to the traumatic experiences of other women who have felt like they're alone, felt like they aren't quite sure what their purpose is or what their God-given identity is, to help you move forward in your life, to help you move forward in your businesses, because He's called all of us to all of those things. He's called us to be prosperous in whatever space you're in. Whether you're an entrepreneur or not, you don't have to be, but He still called you to be prosperous. So I know that that's my space. And today, because of this book, as another part of the catalyst of putting me where I am today, I can say all of that, and I can say it comfortably. So, again, go get the book, Arrested Development, A Journey to Discovering Identity and Purpose. Read it. Feel free to send me an email. Feel free to comment on the podcast episode. Feel free to leave a review. I have no problems discussing any of this with anyone. So, thank you for tuning into this episode 4, where we talked about Arrested Development. Yeah, you know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, but most importantly, go to TanishaBLester.com and cop the book, or find it on Amazon. Just type in my name, Tanisha B. Lester, and Arrested Development, and it will absolutely populate for you on Amazon. Talk to you later. See you next week.